My ruthless mother-in-law demanded I hand over my $150 million company to my husband. I saw through their greed and refused. That's when they bribed my own employees to burn my company to the ground, leaving me with nothing. But they didn't know what I had planned. The very next morning, they woke up to a shocking twist they never saw coming, and their world spiraled out of control. I never thought I'd be sitting here recounting the story of how my world was nearly destroyed. My name is Maya Rivers. I'm 33, a fashion designer, and until a few years ago, I believed I was living the perfect life. I had inherited my father's legacy, a $150 million sustainable clothing empire, and I poured every ounce of my creativity and energy into making it thrive. I loved my work, the fast-paced energy of New York City, and the belief that I was building something meaningful, something my father would be proud of. But then came Daniel Hawthorne. When I first met him, I was swept off my feet. Daniel was everything society told me to look for: charming, handsome, and the heir to an old-money family fortune. We met at a charity gala, one of those glitzy events where I always felt slightly out of place despite my success. Daniel had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. He said all the right things, made me laugh, and within months, I found myself saying yes to his proposal. Looking back, I should have noticed the small cracks early on, but love has a way of blinding you. His mother, Judith Hawthorne, was another story entirely. From the moment we met, she made it clear that she didn't approve of me. I wasn't what she imagined for her precious son. To her, I was a career-obsessed outsider trying to tarnish the Hawthorne family's impeccable image. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't marrying her after all. But Judith was persistent, meddling, and unkind in ways that made me doubt myself. After the wedding, things changed. Subtly at first. Daniel started making comments about how I worked too much or how a wife's role should be in the home. I brushed them off as harmless opinions, but they grew sharper, more pointed. Judith would chime in, suggesting I hand over control of my father's company to Daniel. "He's more experienced with money, dear," she'd say with a patronizing smile. The idea of giving up my life's work felt unthinkable, but I didn't want to cause waves in my marriage, so I avoided confrontation. I wish I had spoken up earlier, because things escalated quickly. One evening, during a particularly tense dinner, Judith laid it all out. "Maya, it's time to make a choice," she said. "You're part of the Hawthorne family now. That means leaving behind childish dreams of running a business. Daniel can take care of everything." I froze. "Childish dreams?" I repeated. "This company is my father's legacy." "It's my legacy." Her expression hardened. "Your duty is to this family, not to some vanity project." Daniel stayed silent, staring at his plate, and in that moment, something in me cracked. "I won't do it," I said firmly. "I'm not giving up my company, and I'm not giving up who I am." Judith's eyes narrowed, and she exchanged a look with Daniel. "We'll see about that," she said coldly. At the time, I thought it was an empty threat. But things only grew worse from there. Daniel became distant, his temper flaring at the smallest things. He criticized my every move, from how I managed my team to how I spent my time. Judith started showing up unannounced, hovering over me like a vulture. I could feel them both working to wear me down, but I refused to yield. The breaking point came one night when I got a call at 2 a.m. My assistant was frantic. "Maya, the factory, it's on fire." I remember rushing out of bed, my heart pounding, as Daniel lazily asked where I was going. "The factory's on fire," I said, already grabbing my coat. His response chilled me. "Oh, that's a shame." The scene at the factory was chaos. Flames roared, smoke filled the air, and firefighters struggled to control the blaze. Half the property was gone by the time the fire was extinguished. I stood there, watching everything my father and I had built reduced to ashes. I felt numb, but deep down, something didn't sit right. Accidents happened, sure, but this felt deliberate. The next morning, the reports rolled in. Faulty wiring, they said. A tragic coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. As I sifted through the rubble, Daniel and Judith barely seemed concerned. Judith even suggested I sell the remaining assets. Cut your losses, she said casually. Maybe it's a sign that you're meant to focus on more important things. Her words stung. My instinct screamed that something was off, but I didn't know where to start. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator, Liam Carter. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I got them. Little did I know, what Liam would uncover would shatter whatever remnants of trust one had left. But at that moment, standing amidst the ruins, I could only feel one thing: determination. They wanted to break me, to take everything I had. But they underestimated me. And that was their biggest mistake. The days after the fire felt like a haze. I barely slept, replaying every moment in my head. I kept thinking about the timing, the details, and most of all, Judith's unnervingly calm reaction. Something about her demeanor wasn't just cold, it was calculated. Daniel, on the other hand, acted as if the fire was an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. He made no effort to comfort me, or even pretend he cared. His apathy stung more than anything else. I threw myself into rebuilding what I could, salvaging my remaining assets and reassuring my employees. But even as I worked, my gut told me there was more to this fire than met the eye. That's when I reached out to Liam Carter, a private investigator I'd been recommended by a friend. Liam was in his early 40s, sharp-eyed, and exuded quiet confidence. He listened carefully as I told him about the fire, my suspicions, and the growing tension with Daniel and Judith. "You think this wasn't an accident," he said, more of a statement than a question. "I know it wasn't," I replied firmly. "I just need proof." Liam nodded. "All right. I'll start with the basics: CCTV footage, employee interviews, and a closer look at the financials of your business. If there's something to uncover, I'll find it." For the next few weeks, I kept myself busy, but the wait for Liam's findings was agonizing. Daniel grew more distant, spending nights away from home without explanation. When I confronted him, he dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "I've got business to handle," he said, his tone dripping with annoyance. "Maybe you should focus on figuring out what to do with your situation." My situation. That's what he called the fire that had nearly destroyed my life's work. It was becoming clearer with each passing day that Daniel was no longer the man I thought I'd married, or maybe he never had been. I started paying closer attention to his behavior. He took more calls in private, had hushed conversations with Judith, and whenever I entered the room, they'd both fall silent. It wasn't paranoia anymore. Something was going on. Liam's first update came 2 weeks later, and what he shared left me reeling. "I've reviewed the CCTV footage from the night of the fire," he began, sliding a laptop across the table toward me. "Watch this." The grainy video showed 2 of my employees entering the factory hours before the fire started. I recognized them immediately. Mark and Elena, both longtime staff members I had trusted implicitly. The footage showed them fiddling with machinery and sprinkling what looked like liquid from a canister across the floor. "Arson," Liam confirmed. "The fire wasn't caused by faulty wiring, Maya. It was deliberate." I felt sick to my stomach. "But why? Why would they do this?" Liam's expression darkened. "That's where things get interesting." I spoke to Mark and Elena separately. At first, they denied everything, but when I showed them the footage, they cracked. They admitted they were paid to start the fire. "Paid? By who?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He hesitated before answering, as if weighing how much to say. "Judith and Daniel." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "You're sure?" They were careful, but not careful enough. Bank records show large, unexplained transfers from an account linked to Daniel. Mark and Elena received those payments just days before the fire. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the betrayal. Judith and Daniel, my husband and his mother, had conspired to destroy my business. I felt anger rising in me, hot and blinding. They had taken everything I loved, everything I'd worked for, and burned it to the ground. For what? Power? Control? I couldn't fathom how they could be so cruel. "What do I do now?" I asked Liam, my voice shaking. "We build a case," he said simply. "You've got enough here to go to the authorities, But if you want this to stick, we'll need more emails, phone records, anything that ties them directly to the arson. Over the next few weeks, Liam continued to dig, and the evidence he uncovered painted a damning picture. There were emails between Judith and Daniel discussing their plan in coded language, phone records showing late-night calls to Mark and Elena, and even a paper trail of bribes paid to other employees to keep quiet about what they knew. Despite the mounting evidence, I didn't confront Daniel or Judith. Not yet. Instead, I played the part of the oblivious wife, biding my time while Liam and my attorney, Sandra Torres, prepared a legal case. Sandra was a no-nonsense powerhouse of a woman, known for her expertise in high-profile cases. When I showed her the evidence, she didn't mince words.
"This is airtight," she said.
They won't get away with it. But pretending everything was normal was the hardest part. Every time I sat across from Daniel at dinner or endured one of Judith's smug remarks, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I knew, that their plan had failed, that I would see them brought to justice. But I couldn't risk tipping them off. Not yet. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what I could, even as the weight of their betrayal threatened to crush me. My father's voice echoed in my mind during those dark days. "Maya, no matter what happens, never let anyone take away your integrity or your strength." I clung to those words like a lifeline. They had tried to destroy me, but they didn't know me. I wasn't the weak, obedient woman Judith wanted me to be, and I wasn't going to let them win. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, they would realize just how much they had underestimated me. Sitting across from Daniel every night, pretending nothing had changed, was an exercise in restraint. I could feel the weight of the lies between us, and it took everything in me to keep playing the role of the clueless wife. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the woman who had once trusted him, who had believed in his charm and easy smile. Now, I was biding my time, gathering strength, and preparing for the moment I'd bring him and Judith down. The evidence Liam uncovered was damning. There were incriminating bank records, conversations between Judith and Daniel discussing how to handle the Maya problem, and even witness testimony from employees who had been bribed to keep quiet. Sandra, my lawyer, assured me that we had enough to take them to court. But I wasn't ready yet. Not until I had everything lined up perfectly. I wanted to make sure there was no way they could wriggle out of this. Then one evening, something happened that nearly broke my composure. I came home to find Judith sitting in my living room, sipping tea, like she owned the place. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, but her presence was enough to set my nerves on edge. "Maya," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought it was time we had a little chat. Woman to woman." I forced myself to stay calm. "About what?" "Oh, you know," she said, setting her teacup down with a deliberate clink. "Life. Choices. The future." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You've been through so much lately. The fire, the stress of rebuilding. It's all very unfortunate." My fists clenched at my sides, but I kept my voice even. "It is. But I'll manage." "Of course you will," she said smoothly. "You've always been so determined. But sometimes, determination isn't enough. Sometimes, you have to know when to let go. Don't you think it's time to consider selling what's left of your company? It's a burden, Maya. And Daniel can help you start fresh." I stared at her, the mask finally slipping. Her words were laced with veiled threats, but I could see the greed in her eyes. She wasn't even pretending to hide it anymore. They wanted me to give up everything, my company, my legacy, my identity, so they could claim it for themselves. "Thank you for your concern, Judith," I said, my voice cold. "But I'm not giving up. Not now, not ever." Her smile faltered for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something, anger, maybe even fear. "Well," she said, standing and smoothing her skirt, "I hope you know what you're doing. For your sake." She left without another word, and as the door closed behind her, I felt a surge of determination. They were getting desperate. They knew I wasn't going to back down, and it was only a matter of time before they made their next move. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. A week later, Liam came to me with the final piece of the puzzle, a recording of a conversation between Judith and Daniel, discussing the fire in detail. They talked about paying off the employees, staging the scene to look like an accident, and even their plans to force me into selling the company afterward. It was all there, clear as day. "It's over," Liam said, handing me the file. "This is the nail in the coffin." I nodded, my heart pounding. "It's time." Sandra wasted no time filing the lawsuit. The charges were serious: arson, conspiracy, fraud. The media caught wind of the story almost immediately, and within days, it was all anyone could talk about. Headlines screamed about the fashion empire scandal, and photos of Judith and Daniel were plastered across every news outlet. They denied everything, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming. When the summons arrived, Daniel finally confronted me. I was in the kitchen, going over some documents, when he stormed in, his face red with anger. "What the hell is this, Maya?" he demanded, waving the papers in my face. "You're suing me? Your own husband?" I stood my ground, meeting his glare with unwavering resolve. "You're not my husband, Daniel. Not anymore. A husband doesn't destroy his wife's life for money. A husband doesn't conspire with his mother to burn down everything she's worked for." His face twisted with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice icy. "I have the proof, Daniel. The emails, the phone calls, the money transfers. I know everything." For a moment, he looked stunned, like he hadn't expected me to fight back. Then, his expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Maya. You're going to regret this." "No," I said, my voice steady. "The only mistake I made was trusting you." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, and I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The fight was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. As the court date approached, the media frenzy intensified. Journalists camped outside my house, and every detail of the case was dissected on talk shows and social media. It was exhausting, but I stayed focused. I had a team of brilliant lawyers, rock-solid evidence, and a fire inside me that refused to be extinguished. The night before the trial, I sat alone in my office, looking at a photo of my father. "I'll make this right, Dad," I whispered. "I'll protect what you built." The next morning, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, ready to face whatever came next. The courtroom was packed that day. I remember walking in, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me. The media had dubbed the trial the Hawthorne betrayal, and everyone was eager to see how it would unfold. But I wasn't here for the cameras or the spectacle. I was here to reclaim my life, my father's legacy, and my dignity. Daniel and Judith sat at the defense table, their expressions carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in their body language. For once, they weren't in control. Judith occasionally whispered to Daniel, her sharp features betraying flickers of worry. Daniel avoided looking at me altogether. It didn't matter. They couldn't intimidate me anymore. Sandra Torres, my lawyer, was a force to be reckoned with. She began the case with a clear, powerful statement. This is a story of betrayal, greed, and the deliberate destruction of a woman's life's work. We have evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Judith and Daniel Hawthorne conspired to destroy Maya River's business for their own gain. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. CCTV footage of my employees setting the fire, bank records showing the bribes paid from Daniel's account, emails between Judith and Daniel discussing the arson, and the damning audio recording where they detailed their plan in their own voices. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together for the jury, and the picture it painted was undeniable. I sat silently, listening to every word, reliving every painful moment. When Mark and Elena, the employees who had set the fire, took the stand to testify, it was difficult to keep my emotions in check. They admitted to their roles, explaining how Judith and Daniel had pressured and paid them to commit the crime. Their guilt was palpable, and while I felt a measure of anger toward them, I couldn't help but pity them as well. They'd been pawns in a much larger game. The defense tried to discredit me, of course. They painted me as a cold, career-obsessed woman who had neglected her husband and antagonized his family. Judith's lawyer even suggested that I was fabricating the accusations out of spite. But Sandra dismantled their arguments with precision and grace. Every piece of evidence was airtight, every witness credible. The more they tried to shift blame, the more desperate they seemed. When it was my turn to testify, I felt a mixture of fear and resolve. I took a deep breath and faced the jury. My father built this company with his blood, sweat, and tears. I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to choke me. When he passed, I vowed to carry on his legacy, to honor his hard work and vision. I trusted Daniel and his family. I believed they wanted what was best for me, for us. But they didn't. They saw my success as a threat, something to control and, if necessary, destroys. I looked directly at Judith and Daniel, who finally met my gaze.
They thought they could break me.
But they underestimated me. The court was silent as I finished my testimony. I felt a strange sense of catharsis, as if a weight I'd been carrying for months had finally lifted. No matter what happened, I knew I'd done everything I could to fight for what was right. The jury deliberated for hours, though it felt like days. When they finally returned, the air in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. My heart raced as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. On the charges of arson, conspiracy, and fraud, we find the defendants guilty. The room erupted in whispers and gasps, but I barely heard them. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. Judith and Daniel sat frozen, their faces pale. The judge sentenced them to lengthy prison terms, and while I knew it wouldn't undo the damage they had caused, it felt like justice. The employees involved in the arson also faced legal consequences, though their sentences were less severe. The court acknowledged that they had been manipulated, but their actions couldn't go unpunished. As for me, the court awarded me full ownership of the Hawthorne family's properties as restitution for the financial and emotional devastation they had caused. It was a symbolic victory as much as a practical one, a way to ensure that the Hawthornes' ill-gotten power would no longer overshadow me. Rebuilding my company wasn't easy. The financial loss was immense, and the emotional scars ran deep. But with the support of my remaining employees, loyal clients, and newfound allies, I poured my heart into restoring what had been lost. And in time, we not only recovered but thrived. The fire had been meant to destroy me, but it had forged something stronger instead. In the years that followed, my story became a beacon of hope for others facing betrayal and hardship. People would write to me, telling me how my fight for justice inspired them to stand up for themselves. It was humbling, and it reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. Looking back, I see now that the fire wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of another. Judith and Daniel tried to strip me of everything, but they couldn't take away my resilience, my determination, or my integrity. And in the end, those were the things that mattered most. My father used to say, "Maya, true strength is not about avoiding the flames, it's about rising from the ashes." I understand that now more than ever.
This is my story.
It's not just about betrayal or revenge. It's about finding the courage to rebuild, to fight for what's right, and to never let anyone take away your power. It's about resilience. And I hope it's a reminder that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way to rise.